Forget everything you thought you knew about the human mind. Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious doesn't just rewrite our understanding of the self. It rips open the veil on why nations turn against each other, why empires rise and collapse in blood, and why, no matter how much progress we make, humanity keeps circling back to war. Most people think war is about territory, resources, politics. But Jung saw deeper. To him, war was not just a political phenomenon. It was a psychic eruption, an explosion of all the shadow parts of our nature, repressed, denied, ignored, until they could no longer be contained. This is the collective shadow, the dark unconscious not just of a person, but of entire nations, cultures, civilizations. Every hatred not confronted, every fear not named, every wound left to rot in silence. It doesn't disappear. It waits. And when enough people ignore their shadow, those shadows find each other. They multiply, they organize, and then they march. We like to think we are rational creatures, but history tells another story. Civilizations that prided themselves on order and progress have descended into genocides, purges, and world wars. Ordinary men and women, farmers, teachers, artists, turned executioners simply by being swept up in an unconscious current. They could neither see nor resist. Jung called this the possession of the collective psyche. In his own words, the bigger the crowd, the more negligible the individual becomes. When people abandon personal reflection and hand themselves over to a group identity, they stop thinking, they stop feeling, they become extensions of the collective shadow. And no group identity is more powerful or more dangerous than the idea of the nation. Because the nation is not just a government. It's a myth, a story we tell ourselves about who we are, what we believe, and most dangerously, who the other is. It becomes a psychic container, a symbol of safety, of superiority, of destiny. And once the shadow invades that container, everything outside of it becomes a threat. You start to hear things like, "They're not like us. They're trying to take what's ours. They must be stopped." Dehumanization begins not with bullets, but with ideas. And those ideas are born in the dark places of the mind, the same places Jung spent his life mapping. He saw that our refusal to own our personal shadow, to face our hatred, envy, fear, and rage, meant we had to find someone else to carry it. We project what we cannot process, and when millions do this at once, war becomes inevitable. Because if you believe they are evil, you can justify anything. This isn't just theory. Jung watched it happen. He lived through both world wars. He watched entire nations fall under the spell of collective possession. He witnessed how Nazi Germany emerged not just through politics, but through mass psychic infection. He wrote, "The phenomenon we have witnessed in Germany is not just a German event. It is a sign of the times. It is what lies in the unconscious of us all." That's the real horror. The potential for war, for genocide, for cruelty, for madness, isn't out there. It's in here, in all of us, dormant, until the right trigger, until the right story tells us we're superior, until the right fear convinces us we're in danger, until the right enemy appears to carry all the guilt we cannot face in ourselves. Jung's warning was clear. What we do not make conscious, we will play out on the world stage. And the most terrifying part, we will believe we're doing it for good. We will cloak it in justice, patriotism, protection. We will make speeches about peace while marching into destruction. We will call it defense, when it's actually denial. So what's the solution? Jung didn't believe in easy answers. He didn't think humanity would be cured of war. But he did believe in the power of awareness. Because the moment you become conscious of the shadow, you regain your agency. You are no longer a puppet of the collective. You become an individual. And the individual, to Jung, was the only thing that could resist the unconscious tide. You can't stop nations from building armies, but you can stop yourself from joining the march mindlessly. You can't erase history, but you can refuse to repeat it unconsciously. It starts here, with one soul daring to look within, with one voice daring to ask, what part of this enemy lives in me? Because when you ask that, truly ask it, the world begins to change. Not from the top down, but from the inside out. When Carl Jung looked out at the world torn apart by tanks and tyrants, he didn't just see politics. He saw the eruption of myths. He saw ancient archetypes rising from the unconscious, taking shape in the figures of leaders, revolutions, enemies, and wars. He saw the hero, the tyrant, the trickster, the victim, not as characters in stories, but as forces possessing nations. To Jung, we weren't just repeating history. We were reliving psychic dramas buried deep within the human soul. And every time we failed to recognize that, we played our parts blindly. That's the danger of a world ruled by the unconscious. It feels real, but it isn't aware. Nations don't see themselves as projecting their shadows. They see themselves as defending against evil. But the unconscious doesn't deal in nuance. It divides the world into binaries. Good versus evil, light versus dark, us versus them. And once a group identifies itself with the good, it becomes blind to its own darkness. This is what Jung feared most. Because when a nation believes it is righteous, it stops questioning itself. It silences dissent. It rewrites history. It becomes possessed. And the scariest part? It will always find an enemy to justify its actions. This is how the collective shadow operates. It needs an external figure to carry what it refuses to face. And so they are labeled the threat. They are blamed for the chaos. They are made to carry centuries of unresolved pain. This is not just a psychological pattern. It's a blueprint for war. It's how crusades begin, how genocides are justified, how civilians cheer as bombs fall on strangers they've never met. Because once the shadow is projected, empathy dies, and in its place comes certainty, the terrifying kind of certainty that believes it is doing the right thing, even as it destroys lives. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And what's true for the individual is even more terrifying for the collective, because for a nation to accept its own shadow, it would have to admit its past crimes, its hypocrisies, its complicity in violence. It would have to admit that its freedom came at a cost, that its peace was built on silence, that its identity was shaped by trauma, not just triumph. But the ego, whether personal or national, resists that. It wants to stay innocent. It wants to stay the hero of its own story. So instead, it rewrites the story, and the unconscious watches silently, waiting for its next eruption. Because repression never deletes the truth. It just buries it deeper. And what's buried becomes volatile. Think of the world today. Global conflicts erupt over ancient wounds, territorial, ethnic, religious, many of which originated long before modern borders were drawn. Why do these wounds persist? Because they were never grieved, never processed, never made conscious, and so they fester in the collective unconscious, shaping laws, policies, propaganda. The shadow doesn't disappear. It adapts. It dresses itself in national pride, economic policy, military defense, but its core remains the same, a refusal to see the pain within. Carl Jung believed this internal blindness was the root of global violence. Because the only way to sustain war is to believe the enemy deserves it. And the only way to believe that is to forget your own shadow. But what if we didn't? What if we looked at history, our history, not as a linear tale of right and wrong, but as a mirror of our unconscious? What if we asked, what pain are we still carrying as a people? What are we trying to prove through force? What would happen if we listened instead of projected? These aren't political questions. They're psychological. They require more than treaties or negotiations. They require inner work, the kind Jung spent his life exploring. He believed that true peace could never come from external systems alone. It had to begin within, because a healed individual becomes immune to propaganda. They think before they follow. They question before they hate. And when enough individuals do this, a nation shifts. A culture awakens. The collective shadow loses its grip, not through violence, but through integration. This is not idealism. It's depth psychology. Jung didn't believe we could eliminate darkness, but he believed we could know it, so that it wouldn't control us from behind the scenes. He believed that by facing our own darkness, we could stop projecting it onto others. That's the revolution he envisioned. Not a political one, but a revolution of consciousness. And in that revolution, every individual matters, because war doesn't begin on a battlefield. It begins in the unseen, in the stories we tell ourselves, in the identities we cling to, in the fears we refuse to name. So the question becomes, will we keep feeding the shadow, Or will we finally face it? To understand how war takes hold of the human psyche, you must first understand how easy it is to belong to something that feels righteous, especially when your own inner world feels fractured. When people are lost, scared, or ashamed, they look for something bigger than themselves to carry their pain. Something that offers structure. Something that makes them feel powerful. Something that tells them, you're the good one. You're on the right side of history. That something becomes a nation, a belief system, a flag, a cause. And when that cause is fused with identity, when dissent feels like betrayal, you've already stepped into the collective shadow. Carl Jung warned that the collective psyche is not a rational one. It doesn't respond to facts or empathy. It responds to archetypes. It wants a hero to worship, a villain to hate, a sacred story to anchor the chaos of life. And when the individual no longer knows who they are, they're ripe to be absorbed into the mass. In the mass, there is no responsibility, only mission, no nuance, only certainty. This is why propaganda works so well. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to resonate with something buried in the unconscious. A fear, a humiliation, an ancient wound. And the moment it touches that nerve, it bypasses thought entirely. Suddenly they are the enemy. Suddenly we must strike first. Suddenly violence feels like duty. But here's the truth Jung wanted us to see. The external enemy is rarely the real one. The real enemy is within, the unloved parts of ourselves. The failures we pretend never happened. The generational shame we never faced. That is the true powder keg. And when it's full, all it takes is one match. One charismatic leader. One lie wrapped in moral urgency. One act of violence to justify 1,000 more. And suddenly, you're not just a person anymore. You're a soldier of the shadow. You don't question what you're doing. You don't want to question it. Because if you did, you'd have to feel the pain. You'd have to admit what you've become. So you keep going. This is what Carl Jung called psychic possession. Not demonic in a religious sense, but in a psychological one. You're no longer yourself. You're no longer aware. And you won't realize it until it's too late. History is full of such stories. Entire nations that believed they were protecting themselves, when they were actually projecting unresolved trauma onto the world. Germany in the 1930s. Rwanda in the 1990s, the countless invasions, occupations, and revolutions that started with justice and ended in genocide. These events did not begin with monsters. They began with unseen pain, and Jung's voice echoes louder now than ever before. The gigantic catastrophes that threaten us today are not elemental happenings of a physical or biological order, but are psychic events. The war is not just in the streets. It's in the mind, in the unspoken, in the archetypal, and it's happening again, just in more subtle forms. Digital tribalism, mass polarization, echo chambers that reward rage and punish reflection, algorithms that feed our unconscious cravings, not for truth, but for confirmation. We are dividing again, not just by country, but by identity. And as we divide, we project. As we project, we dehumanize. And as we dehumanize, we prepare for war. Not with bombs this time, but with something even more seductive. Ideological certainty. That certainty, Jung warned, is the gateway to evil. Not because we want to do harm, but because we convince ourselves it's necessary. Every atrocity in history was justified. That's what makes it so chilling. And the ones who committed them look just like us. So what do? How do we resist the pull? Jung didn't believe we could stop the world from falling into shadow, but he believed that the individual could. The only real defense against mass unconsciousness is personal consciousness. The one who is aware cannot be used, cannot be fooled, cannot be swept away. They may still feel anger, still feel fear, but they will not project it outward. They will sit with it, witness it, integrate it, and that is the most dangerous thing to any system of war. An individual who is whole, because wholeness breaks the spell. It breaks the us versus them lie. It dismantles the illusion of moral purity. It says, I am capable of darkness, but I choose something different. That choice, made again and again, creates a ripple. And those ripples, when multiplied across enough souls, become a force larger than armies. That is the quiet revolution Jung saw coming. Not one of banners or protests, but of inner awakenings. It starts small, with a question, a pause, a refusal to hate someone simply because the group demands it. It grows with each act of introspection, each shadow faced, each wound grieved rather than blamed, until finally, the unconscious begins to shrink. Not disappear, but transform. That is the work, and that is the only way forward, in a world that stands once again on the brink. So what now? We've seen what happens when the unconscious remains unexamined. We've seen how nations, like people, collapse when they forget their pain. We've seen the shadows rise, generation after generation, wearing different flags, different slogans, but always bringing the same ruin. And yet, Carl Jung didn't end his message in despair, because within every shadow lies a choice. And that choice begins with you. You, who were born into a world already trembling with conflict. You, who inherited the trauma of those who came before. You, who have lived long enough to feel both the seduction of belonging and the sting of separation. You may not be able to end war, but you can end the war within. Because peace, real peace, starts in the psyche. It starts with recognizing that the enemy is often the reflection of your own rejected self. The aggressor may wear a different uniform, speak a different language, follow a different god, but beneath it all is the same human heart. Wounded, longing, afraid. Jung called this the process of individuation, the courageous journey of making the unconscious conscious, of integrating all parts of the self, light and shadow, into something unified, grounded, and whole. And when enough people walk that path, the world begins to shift, because you can no longer be manipulated by fear. You can no longer be recruited by rage. You stop feeding the machine of projection and start feeding your soul. This isn't idealism. It's psychological realism, and it's more urgent now than ever. Because today, the battlefield is not just soil. It's digital. It's narrative. It's inside your phone, your newsfeed, your mind. You're being conditioned to pick a side, to hate quickly, to fear instinctively, to follow without asking why. But Jung's voice breaks through the noise, urging you to pause, to observe, to reflect. Because the moment you become conscious, you become dangerous to unconscious systems, not through violence, but through clarity. The one who sees their own darkness cannot be baited by someone else's. The one who knows their own wounds no longer needs to wound others. The one who has faced their own death, psychically, emotionally, no longer lives in fear of losing control. This is the spiritual strength Jung saw in the truly individuated person. Not someone perfect, but someone real, grounded, sovereign, unshakable. And these are the people who shift the world. Not the loudest, not the most powerful, but the most conscious. You don't need to save the world, but you do need to see it. To see where the shadow is being projected. To see when narratives are being weaponized. To see when fear is no longer your own, but something planted inside you. And once you see it, you reclaim your power, not just for yourself, but for every generation that comes after. Because the unconscious doesn't just repeat pain, it also repeats healing. Every time you choose reflection over reaction, you heal the line behind you. Every time you face your shadow instead of projecting it, you prevent a war, maybe not a national one, but a war in your family, your community, your inner life. That matters. It matters more than we can ever fully know. Because the true war, the one Jung warned us about, was never just out there. It was in here, in every one of us. And if that's where it started, then that is also where it ends. With you, right now, choosing to wake up, to see not just the shadow in others, but the one in yourself, to hold it, to learn from it, to transform it, and in doing so, to become the kind of human who does not march to the drums of unconscious destruction, but walks quietly and fiercely toward integration, toward peace, toward wholeness. Subscribe to the Awakened Compass and join our membership to unlock the full journey within.